me now to understand the broader social context of this verdict is Dr. Brittany Cooper. She is an associate professor of women's and gender studies as well as Africana studies at Rutgers University.
Seems to be this conspiracy theory believed by some of his family members, of course him, that Kelly was set up and everyone is lying about this case. So what do you think about that?
I mean, as the old black proverb goes, denial is not just a river in Africa. And so there are a whole lot of folks who believe that, or who need to believe this fiction, who need to tell this story because they want to continue to step in the name of love. They want to continue to bump and grind and they don't want to feel any type of way about it. But the evidence is overwhelming here. And at some point, we're going to have to decide. As a community, do we care about black women and girls? Do we believe black women and girls when they have been violated? And let me say this too, Shannon. I'm 40. Aaliyah, we just, marked the anniversary of Aaliyah's passing in August. Aaliyah is older than me. So R.KELLY has literally been abusing young girls since I was a girl. Since his first album, that's 30 years of abuse that we know about in the public sphere. This was his moment of reckoning. It should have happened much earlier. And one of the things we can also think about as a community is that perhaps if we had addressed it when he was doing it to Aaliyah in the 1990s, then we wouldn't have all of these new victims who he's done this to in the last decade, in the last 5 years. That's on us as a community, and I'm glad today that those victims hopefully feel like they got some semblance of justice.
February 1st, 2022. A third motion for extension of time to file post-trial motions by Robert Sylvester Kelly entered in by Jennifer Bonjean. That same day, a corrected letter motion for extension of time to file post-trial motions by Robert Sylvester Kelly was entered by Bonjean. The judge ordered granting the motion for the extension of time to file as to Robert Sylvester Kelly, giving the defendant's post-trial motion due by February 17th of 2022. The government's response was due March 10th, 2022. And thereafter, if the defendants replied, it was due by March 24th, 2022, ordered by Judge Donnelly. That same day, a motion for substitution for both Nicole Blank Becker and Thomas A. Fornella with attorney Jennifer Bonjean was submitted. The order was received by the court for both counsel motions to be substituted. Local Civil Rule 1.4 provides an attorney who has appeared as attorney of record for a party may be relieved or displaced only by order of the court and may not withdraw from a case without leave of the court granted by order. Such an order may be granted only upon a showing by affidavit or otherwise of satisfactory reason for withdrawal or replacement or displacement and the posture of the case, including its position, if any, on the calendar and whether or not the attorney is asserting a retaining or charging lien. All applications to withdraw must be served upon the client and, unless excused by the court, upon all other parties. Local Civil Rule 1.4. Counsel is directed to file a motion in accordance with Local Civil Rule 1.4, ordered by Judge Donnelly. A motion for withdrawal by attorney Thomas A. Fornella by Robert Sylvester Kelly was submitted by Fornella. February 2nd, 2022, another motion to withdraw of counsel by Nicole Blank Becker was submitted. Now, both of these motions were granted later on that day by Judge Donnelly. February 17th, 2022, a day that would shock the internet as we knew it. Motion for both acquittal and new trial was submitted by Jennifer Bonjean. Citing the argument for an acquittal, the government failed to prove the defendant guilty of the offense of racketeering count 1, and the government failed to prove counts 2 through 9 of the indictment. Citing the following for a new trial. Defendant was denied effective assistance of counsel where his trial attorneys failed to conduct a meaningful voir dire of potential juries and challenge unqualified jurors, some of whom had watched the inflammatory docuseries surviving R. Kelly or were familiar with prior accusations of sexual abuse of minors against the defendant. Counsel's objectively, unreasonably performance during voir dire resulted in the impaling of a jury that was neither fair nor impartial. Also, the defendant is entitled to a new trial where one of his trial attorneys labored under a disabling conflict of interest as a result of her simultaneously representation of the defendant and the government's star witness, Jane, that was imputed to the entire defense team, as well as the motion for extension of time for file supplemental to Rule 33 was filed as well.
Look, I think as a community that we've got to hold this tension, right? That on the one hand, having a healthy skepticism of the legal system is important, because we're talking about the same legal system that couldn't convict Trayvon Martin's killer, right? We're talking about the same legal system that couldn't convict Michael Brown's killer. And so I know that there are many in our community who say, well, when it's a brother, then they can always do this, right? So you don't have to believe that the legal system is actually on the side of justice for Black people to understand that there are, as you said, 40 accusers, so many women and girls across decades who have presented compelling testimony that R. Kelly was a predator, that he was the kind of predator that we warn our children against, that we say, you know, if you see that man coming, don't send your children to his house, don't let your children be alone with him. And he abused women, he humiliated them, he violated them in every possible way that he could. And so we do have a problem in our community with fake news, but we also have a problem in our community with because of the trauma that Black men have experienced at the hands of the legal system. We are primed as a community to believe the best about Black men, and that's important. That's an important form of resistance, but we got to have a line somewhere. And when you have dozens of Black women and girls saying he is not safe, we can't decide that R. Kelly's music is more important than the actual lives, protection, and safety of real women and girls who live in our communities and are asking us to look out for them. They have to matter more. They just do.
February 18th, 2022. The order went accordingly. The court has received the defendant's Rule 29 and Rule 33 motions and the defendant's request for an additional 30 days to supplement his Rule 33 motion. The defendant's submissions do not comply with my individual practices and rules in two respects. First, the defendant's Rule 29 motion is 56 pages long and no application for extra pages was made. Under my individual practices and rules 4.c, unless prior permission has been granted, memorandum of law in support of or in opposition to motions are limited to 25 pages, double space, and request to file memorandum exceeding the page limits must be made in writing 5 days prior to the due date. The motion is therefore denied without prejudice to refile in accordance with my individual practices and rules. The defendant must refile the motion no later than February 28, 2022, and the government's response is due by March 20th, 2022. And the defendant's reply, if any, is due by April 4th, 2022. Second, the defendant's request for 30 days to supplement his Rule 33 motion, which I construe as an extension request, must state, among other things, the government's position on the request. The defendant's submission does not provide this information. I therefore deny the motion without prejudice to refile. Any resubmission must state whether the adversary consists and, if not, the reasons given by the adversary for refusing to consent. See individual practices and rules 2.f, ordered by Judge Donnelly.
Look, we don't believe Black people in our broader context, and we certainly don't believe Black women. And here's the thing, that's a way that we've internalized the worst lies that white supremacy told us about black women. That, you know, one of the lies of slavery was that black girls were unrapeable, that black women were unrapeable, that we always wanted it, that we were hot in the pants, lascivious, and down for it. And so as a community, we actually have a responsibility to tell the truth and to say that black girls are, quite frankly, more likely to be victims of sexual violence than other girls, that almost half of black girls before the age of 18 report some form of coercive sexual contact or sexual violence. There was a wonderful piece out today from Dr. Treva Lindsay, who's a professor at Ohio State, detailing that, and I would encourage people to go and read her work. And so she shows us and tells us this is a rampant problem in our community, but we have come to believe that when it comes to black men, all of a sudden we don't trust black women, we don't believe black women. But who else rides for brothers more than black women? So you know this brother had to be egregious for sisters to stand up and say, hey, he is not safe. And when you think about the sisters in your life, the women in your life, black women are people of integrity. And that doesn't mean that every one of us is trustworthy, but in the main, we are. And so we can't believe the lies that white supremacy has told us about how black girls are invulnerable and that we don't get violated. And last thing, the reason we don't want to believe it is because we don't want to believe the lies about black men being sexual predators. R.KELLY was convicted of violating the Mann Act. And when that act was passed in the early 20th century, the first thing they did was to come after the fighter, Jack Johnson, the boxer, Jack Johnson, and say that he, you know, was trafficking white women because he was taken up with a white girl. So that law has been used in our community specifically to abuse black men and to say they're hypersexual. But what we have here is black women and girls who got on the stand and said that R.KELLY did these things. They provided video evidence, their personal testimony. The folks who helped him to facilitate these crimes against these women said that he did it. So the preponderance of the evidence is overwhelming here. And we can't continue to use racism as an excuse to let black men be let off the hook for hurting women in our communities. That's not a respect to our ancestors. That's not a way to fight against the injustices that white supremacy has done to us. Either we're going to all get free together or none of us is going to get free.